This video is brought to you by Masterworks. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they are providing to the entire Upper Echelon community. Alright, today, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting topics that I've ever covered before on the channel. Before publication, I sat here for probably almost 2 hours, simply trying to think of a title. The most powerful man in gaming, or the psychological manipulations of Riot Games. I wanted to find something that adequately expressed what the video was about, but with so many key factors involved, it felt nearly impossible. I settled on, obviously you've already read it, The Birth of Toxicity, a Psychological Laboratory, but the totality of this video will include a history of Riot Games, a discussion of the most powerful man you likely never heard of in the entire gaming industry, the birth of a now mainstream buzzword and behavior modification trend, as well as psychological experimentation that has influenced platforms and companies from Twitter to Reddit to Activision Blizzard and far beyond. It all starts with Jeffrey Lynn. Currently working at Facebook, I refuse to call it Meta, he is the creative director of Horizon Metaverse, but far more interesting than where he is where he came from. Let's go back in time to 2012. Jeffrey Lynn majored in cognitive psychology with a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, co-authoring multiple papers such as Capture of Attention to Threatening Stimuli Without Perceptual Awareness. His early work centered on behavior modification. In 2012, he accepted a job at Riot Games as the lead social systems designer and proceeded to change the very fabric of the industry. The word toxic or toxicity is not new. The word has been defined as poisonous, harmful, or unpleasant for centuries and can be traced through history to its initial origin of medieval Latin. It's not an uncommon word, but prior to 2013, the terminology was not exactly a fixture of video game culture. Of course, nowadays, you hear it all the time. Toxic players, toxic behavior, oh he's just toxic, or toxicity is the real problem. There are even multi-corporate alliances to fight against toxicity. But where did the phrase even start? You would be hard-pressed to find any meaningful evidence of widespread usage before 2013, because in 2013, Jeffrey Lynn gave a prominent speech at GDC, also known as the Game Developers Conference. This particular speech was about shaping behavior in online video games and had a particular emphasis on toxic players and toxic behaviors. Jeffrey Lynn believed that it was Riot's responsibility, a moral and ethical responsibility, to curb those behaviors that he deemed as toxic, and outlined various different methods by which developers can try to do exactly that. The speech itself is quite fascinating, but when analyzed in context, it becomes terrifying. Okay, before going further, I need to clarify something. Today, and previously, a couple of times, the video has been sponsored by Masterworks, but in my prior segments about the company, I failed to clarify a couple of critical items. First, Masterworks has nothing to do with crypto, NFTs, or blockchain. I'll say it again, nothing to do with crypto, NFTs, or blockchain whatsoever. It is not associated with these concepts in the slightest, and quite the opposite in fact. All of their paintings are physically stored in New York City in a gallery, as well as securitized with the SEC. Masterworks is democratizing high-value artwork, blue-chip artwork, but I've seen some confusion on this after prior videos. Blue-chip artwork refers to the most successful artists, the most valuable work, and has the specific added context of long-standing value retention. Blue-chip artwork is what people wait in lines at museums to see. It fetches the most money at auctions and has been valuable for decades, even centuries. Blue chip art is also insulated from other existing markets like stocks and bonds. It is less volatile, it has outperformed traditional markets like the S&P 500, as a random example, for the past 26 years, and to date they've sold 3 paintings with a net 30% IRR to their investors. Now for the special offer though. There is currently a wait list to sign up for the platform. To clear something up, that isn't FOMO marketing, that's a result of their process. I'll explain in just a second here. Having partnered with them directly, you can go to masterworks.art/upper echelon and skip the waitlist right now. Again, there's a link down below to skip the waitlist and sign up for Masterworks today. To be very clear, I am not a registered financial advisor. I am discussing Masterworks as a business model, as well as providing a code for anyone interested to skip the waitlist and check out the platform today, but none of this is registered financial advice. However, as part of the onboarding process for Masterworks, disclosure, I have personally gone through this process. I currently own shares in a painting by Mark Rothko. As part of this onboarding process, you will speak directly with a financial advisor who can discuss options and help thoroughly brief you on the platform. From top to bottom, they have a comprehensive, streamlined, and professional platform. Big thank you to Masterworks for sponsoring the channel. Back on task. Jeffrey Lynn, also known as Riot Lyte, was a notorious figure in the League of Legends community for about 3 years. He led the company's effort to eradicate toxic behavior, but in a way, he also, not more than just in a way, he actively engaged in it. League of Legends, over the years, has had a number of different features, updates, and changes, but one of the most notorious failures was called the Tribunal. The Tribunal was effectively crowdsourced justice by popular vote. Players could participate, look at chat logs, and then decide guilt or innocence after a report had been filed. It was not the ultimate executioner in all cases and could not hand out permanent bans by itself, but temporary suspensions and chat penalties were very common. It sounds good on paper, but there was a bit of a problem. Participants were capable of earning rewards, called IP at the time, if they successfully ruled on a punishment case. There were additional features like a forced period of time, 60 seconds, before you could vote to stop people from just click spamming through all of them, and I even did some of these myself back in the day when it was live, but a fairly obvious problem began to appear, which would have disastrous consequences. When you incentivize punishment, handing out rewards for successful convictions and suspensions only, you all but guarantee that the scales will tilt in that particular direction. Players began to hand out punishments for everything in order to get rewards, and eventually the tribunal was taken down completely. This may seem irrelevant for our purposes today, owing to the fact that the tribunal existed in a rudimentary form before Jeffrey Lynn even joined the company, but bear with me. In his time there, when the tribunal was still active, Riot Lyte, Jeffrey Lynn's in-game moniker, became well known in the community for smiting people. This was a term that referred to his propensity for copying in-game chat logs that he obtained himself from Riot servers from the tribunal, and then posting them on Reddit or other forums to embarrass or humiliate people who complained about the feature wrongfully banning them. An entire subreddit was built around that specific phenomenon, which came to be known as light smites, and it happened frequently. At first, the community adored him. He was putting the trolls in their place and dishing out some well-earned karma, but over time, things began to change. Now, Riot Lyte, regardless of his forum activity, which is important to understand for context, but in addition to this, he was not solely interested in humiliating those that he personally deemed to be toxic. He was far more interested in greater influence over video game culture. And in 2015, using his position as the lead social systems designer at Riot Games, he began to seek precisely that. Referred to by Wired as the largest virtual psychology lab in the world, Riot Games began to conduct surveys, we'll call them. In an effort to curb toxicity by altering inappropriate usernames, that's their official title for it, wide swaths of the player population began to receive surveys. These were not ordinary surveys, and they were also highly incentivized because players were having their name forcefully altered in-game to something benign and randomly generated. This is what the surveys looked like. Questions about whether or not the person needed to be the center of attention. Questions about whether or not they think they are better than others. Questions about whether or not they are willing or likely to follow orders, and whether or not they like to have control over people. It turned out that these were slightly modified versions of the narcissistic personality inventory and the aggression scale, which are psychological questionnaires often used for research and diagnosis. There was another survey that included a numbered table asking players, in order to be able to change their name again to what they actually wanted, and I believe if they didn't do this, there was a $10 fee associated, asking them how many times they had hurt others in the past 7 days, how many times they had fought back when struck, how many times they called people names, or even encouraged others to fight. When asked for clarity on how Riot had decided which names to suspend, the answer from an official spokesperson on the forums was, quote, "I won't go into the specifics, but it was a mixture of things which include feedback from players, individual audits by a rioter, magic, and a lot of alcohol," end quote. Point being, Riot Games was psychologically probing their player base, but it gets worse. As per an MIT Game Lab seminar in 2013, Jeffrey Lynn stated point blank that Riot Games has extensive access to the socioeconomic status of their players in certain countries, as well as age, sex, education levels, and more.
We even have data that extends beyond the game. For some countries, we even have their SES, their education scores, their age, even their gender. And, socioeconomic status. Yeah. And we can correlate any of these data with in-game data as well.
According to him, they can correlate any of this data with in-game data as well, and let's harken back to the fact that they were serving narcissistic personality inventory and aggression scale questions to their player base. And far from being finished, as per a conference on the Psychological Science YouTube channel, he was offering this data to all labs in psychology and many other fields.
So to wrap up, we do want to open our doors to all labs in psychology and many other fields as well. And the new process that we have on our website is pretty simple. So we're taking 1 to 3 page proposals from labs, and it's pretty straightforward stuff: a main question, data that you would like from the company, proposed analysis and predicted outcomes, and mutual value to your field and to game designers, right? How can we make the online experience better as a result of your study?
To reiterate here, Wired was referring to Riot Games as the world's largest virtual psychology lab in 2015. In that same article, Jeffrey Lynn states, quote, "When we first started, applying classic psychological theories was the most logical approach, but as we settled in and better understood how to look at human behaviors online, we started digging in more and more into bleeding edge stuff," end quote. Riot was running behavioral experiments utilizing colored chat messages. That one was called the Optimus Primer experiment, I think. They were running experiments on degrees of punishment, interpersonal dynamics, and more. They ramped these up into the use of narcissistic personality questionnaires and aggression metrics in an effort to delve into the psyche of toxic players, but we're still not done. Towards the end of his time at the company, Jeffrey Lynn was beginning to influence other platforms. At GDC 15, he hosted a discussion of the psychology behind shadow banning, a tactic now employed by nearly all major tech firms, including YouTube. And he did so through the lens of a direct partnership with Reddit, where Riot Games had helped in an experiment whereby certain content creators were shadow banned to test efficacy and results.
In the early days of the internet, silence ban players could learn that they could get away with these behaviors. They know that you were seeing the behaviors, they know that you could be damaged by the behaviors, and nothing would be done. But with shadow bans, we've changed the power, right? We've given the power back to the neutral and positive players. The negative player never really knows if they lost their microphone or their megaphone. And in a recent collaboration with Reddit to reduce negative posts, we saw just one shadow ban improve the behaviors of 79% of posters. Little tweaks like these can stop the minority from inflicting their perception, their reality, on your community.
As another smaller example, in 2014, I believe, Riot implemented a system where those who reported a player for misconduct would be notified themselves if action had resulted in punishment. This was meant to give gratification signals to those who reported their peers and modify the rates at which this behavior occurred. As far as I can tell, this is the first online example of the policy being created, and now, again, a large number of major tech and gaming companies utilize this method, from Activision Blizzard to social media like Twitter and beyond. Jeffrey Lynn, also known as Riot Lyte, entered Riot Games with a degree and doctorate in cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. He pioneered systems that are now used all across gaming and the wider tech industry, while simultaneously spurring widespread adoption of new buzzwords and cultural framing in video games. His effort to eradicate toxic behavior turned Riot into a massive digital psych lab as he ran experiments on players, while a fanbase formed around his habit of publicly shaming and humiliating people on various forums because he unilaterally decided that they deserved it. His experience with psychological manipulation transcends even Riot Games, with an official patent on his LinkedIn page that refers to a psychological phenomenon which is utilized to effectively advertise product branding even while a user is in fast forward, aka a method by which you can brute force advertisements into people's brains, even if they aren't deliberately watching them. He proceeded to offer the data collected through experimentation on the League of Legends community to other companies, and even partnered with Reddit many years ago during the early phases of testing, as well as perfecting, the concept of shadow banning. But to go even further, in a quote given to The Verge, March of 2015, Jeffrey Lynn stated, quote, "We realized that if we really want to improve these online interactions, we have to go beyond League of Legends. We're not alone in this space," end quote. And it was clarified that Riot was working with other game developers, internet companies, and schools to share data and best practices. I'll keep this part short because it's less relevant to the story than other portions, but somewhat necessary for context on his eventual exit from Riot Games and who he really was. Jeffrey Lynn was accused by an ex-girlfriend of psychological abuse. A flurry of scandals hit him from all sides at one particular point. The allegations were that he had multiple affairs and relationships with other women, and then filed a lawsuit against his ex-fiancée because she kept the ring. A lot of things, a lot of drama, which would likely be entirely irrelevant if his career had not been built on the destruction of anyone he deemed to be toxic while orchestrating psychological experimentation and analysis on the League of Legends community. His departure from Riot Games in 2016 led to Magic Leap, then Facebook, and now Jeffrey Lynn, also known as Lyte, the man who turned League of Legends into a quasi-psych lab of behavior modification and experimentation, is the creative director at what may very well be the company most likely to create a working version of the metaverse. His work impacted countless other tech and gaming companies along the way, with untold further impact that we simply don't know about at this particular point. And that impact was to govern the behavior of people that he deemed as toxic, while personally humiliating them when given the options. The idea of toxic behavior has become a lightning rod for criticism of specific video game communities. It is a phrase echoed in various forms by gaming media, legacy media, and outside voices, while it gains further traction as a justification for companies to create systems that suppress peer-to-peer interaction, or at the very least, highly govern it. Stamping out toxicity is a funnel by which companies may justify any number of restrictive policies, and all of it was born from a man who turned one of the world's most popular video games into a psych experiment, as he overstepped professional boundaries and helped refine suppression techniques that now plague multiple separate industries, including social media, widespread. Jeffrey Lynn, also known as Riot Lyte, is one of the most influential people in the history of modern gaming, and yet very few people know precisely why or how. Hopefully more of them do now. That's it. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links down below, primarily Patreon and Odyssey, also another YouTuber to check out, merchandise, social media, and Masterworks, of course, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.